local ward councillors, Councillor Davis and Councillor Sweet, who have their comments. Take them in alphabetical order for want of any other reason. So first of all, Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a very extensive report, and I very much welcome new building at social and intermediate rent, which is vitally needed. But like the hundreds of residents who have formally opposed this and have approached me as well, there are some very real concerns. That skyscraper, but I'll come on to that. So, but it's also really important that we get the play space right to promote the health and well-being of our young people. So in the wider area, there are no parks to walk to within 10 minutes, which is a recommendation from Play England. So apart from Bramford Gardens, or Pollution Park as it's known, accessible only by walking next to 4 lanes of speeding traffic. So all those measures, like the pocket park, the naturalistic and creative play, very much to be encouraged, but I do feel it's limited in its scope. So I could just see reference to stepping logs and felled tree trunk, and also yes, there's the Wandsworth Trail there, but we also have mention of pocket parks. And it does look like there's that crescent sort of slither next to the Wandsworth. Rainwater gardens in between sound good, but what more could be done here? Because it's a sort of a one-off opportunity, isn't it? And I do wonder whether children or young people would have been consulted in the course of all of this. So residents have raised also about there are other needs in the area, which I can't see in the plans. It's all to do with the infrastructure. So there's we don't have sufficient nursery places according to need, but we know there will be lots of babies and young children into this precise area, the Gasworks, but also the wider area. Doctor's surgeries, they'd be at more than 20-minute walks away. They're already overstretched. So, those are issues the residents have raised with me, and I sort of fully think that's right to raise that. Now, so this 29-storey skyscraper, so, I recognise that, the balancing act that's got to be done here, but the local plan states that buildings in this tall building zone are to be 7 to 10 stories high. And this is not 7 stories high, but it's more than 4 times that. It's 19 stories higher. So I feel that's not a compromise, but, that it's just so far removed, I don't understand. It's taller than any other building in the area. It's, we've had so much reference to buildings that are 12 stories, 15 stories high, but I just imagine what's the shadow, this eyesore of, the luxury apartments were cast, what's it, looking down on us. It's not a tall building, it's an excessively tall skyscraper. I really much feel, we've seen all of these residents say it time and time again. We've seen all these luxury skyscrapers popping up all over the place. And, yes, we need more building, but not more luxury apartments, not more skyscrapers. It's not Canary Wharf here, it's not Nine Elms, but it's historic Wandsworth Town with its heritage, its Grade 2 listed buildings, its conservation areas. And so, for that, I just think that the rationale is not robustly justified, I would say. And just my last, just thinking about the views to the west. So if you're in Putney, so some areas in Putney, like the towpath, are actually described as quite rural. So there's a very huge contrast there. Some people have talked about, the creep westwards. Maybe that needs to stop at some point. And then just lastly, to make the point about the connectivity and the infrastructure there, yes, there are lots of bus routes there, but there's a lot of congestion as well. I know you can be on the number 44 bus stuck in traffic for a good half an hour or so. And also just pointing out that the cycle superhighway 8 goes through Armoury Way and Swanston Way, and it would be reckless, dangerous for cyclists to go there, and no one would. So that's just another area that I'm not saying that this building development can specifically address, but it was raised in the report, so I wanted to raise that point. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sweet.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm concerned about the height and design of this application and the way that the Council's own policies are being disapplied. One of the most important things that happened during my time as a councillor was the creation of the Old York Road Conservation Area. This came about as a direct result of the planning application for the home base tower at the other end of Old York Road from this application. Residents at the time were extremely upset about the impact that tower would have on the historic area adjacent to this site. I tell you this because I want you to understand that protection from tall buildings was the absolutely critical reason for creating that conservation area. It's of course not in the technical description defining the conservation area, but I can assure you that the resident thinking behind it was concern about tall buildings. I'd like you to bear in mind tonight that the Old York Road Conservation Area came into being because of a merely 15-storey tower. This application is for a 29-storey tower. That's why so many of the hundreds of residents objecting to this application and the petition from Councillor de la Sejoule concern the height. I'm concerned about the non-compliance with council policy as well. I'd like to read the very shocking paragraph 4.11 to you. It reads, "The council and the GLA would assess the application as non-compliant with the location and plan-led requirements of Part B of London Plan Policy D9, as it fails to meet the full requirement of Local Plan LP4 in terms of proposed height range. This assessment would be in terms of visual impact, architectural quality, environmental impact, and functional impact of the proposal." My question for you this evening to consider is, what is the point of having a local plan that says what the parameters should be if the council is going to disregard those parameters? The local plan modifications only came in 2023, and I cannot understand why the council is disapplying so much of it. I'd also add that having applications partly in outline is concerning. Given resident concerns about height, I don't think it's appropriate to leave two 12-storey buildings in this application outline. So to sum up, there is much in this scheme to welcome, especially the affordable housing and the improvements to the Wandle, which will make a new green, natural space in a very urban environment. But I do think the height and the policies need careful thought. Thank you.
Thank you for two good presentations of local views. Now, councillors and members, it's your chance to ask questions of the councillors. I think on occasions, if I may say so, we've strayed a little bit into policy areas that the councillors are not necessarily qualified to reply to, and indeed it's not for them to counter the arguments. This should be about their presentations and what they know about their constituents' views, and we'll get on to other issues with the officers later. So over to you, Councillor Coakley, I can see.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Coakley for St Mary's Ward. I wanted to thank both councillors for their presentation, and I wanted to ask, based on their conversations with the residents and by guessing their views, is there anything that the residents felt could be, instead of a huge material change such as the height, which we've already heard your views, are there any details in the application that they feel could be amended by a condition or to make the overall application more palatable for them tonight?
That's addressed to either of them, I think. So
yeah, they'll probably likely be talking to separate groups of residents, so they can both come back on that.
Well, thank you for your question. I think this will be difficult for you to address in a condition, but one of the things I think is not ideal about this application by far is the inability of new residents that might live in this site to cross Swandon Way, cross the main road, Armoury Way rather. over to the rest of Wandsworth town, especially as this is a site that's going to have a large number of families living there. I think it's concerning, the idea that they'd be crossing a very busy main road, and disappointing that there are no measures included to improve that crossing and permeability.
I'm sure we'll raise that with the officers. And do you want to add to that? Mike?
Sorry. I very much agree, actually, that Wandsworth Town is very, there are lots of islands and it's very difficult to traverse the area, and that's something that residents raise, and also, businesses who serve those residents raise that as well, and how to get, people going to that live music venue from tiny little Wandsworth Town Station that's really stretched as well. So I think that whole sort of, connectivity does need to be looked at. Two people actually did look at the plans and saw how there's sort of like a certain amount of greening and trees in some areas, and could that be improved throughout, and in particular maybe on the walkways and near the restaurant areas. Those are two things, and then, residents have actually said about, the play space. Thank you.
Councillor Owens, and then Councillor Boswell, and Councillor Govindia.
Councillor Owens, Northcote Ward. I was very interested to hear from Councillor Sweet about the history of the Old York Road Conservation Area, and obviously the history of the home-based tower. I was just wondering a little bit to hear a bit more about the impact on the residents of the Old York Road area of this development, and the Tonsees as well. Thank you.
And Councillor Boswell, if we can try and do...
My question is to Councillor Davies. I'm Councillor Sheila Boswell, Tooting Beck Ward. My question is around the capacity for play on the site that you talked about in your presentation. Obviously, from my knowledge, I know there's a paucity of parks in that area, and there are estates close by where people are living in very small spaces. This site, as I understand it, the play park is in the public realm, which means that those living in the estates would be able to use the park that is going to be built there. From what your residents have said to you, have they thought about this? Rather like Councillor Kolkov said, is there anything that could be added to that play space, or what's envisioned already, that would be attractive for them to be able to use, and they start to see a bonus rather than a minus?
But if we take those two, Councillor Sweet, Old York Road, Councillor Davis, play space.
Thank you, Councillor Owens, for your question. There were two areas I'd focus on in terms of the way residents feel about this application. The first is about policy. It may seem that I've raised a very specific point about paragraph 4.11 about the disregarding of council policy. But if you read the resident objections, many of them actually in this paper, the resident objections describe the problem with they're kind of being upset about council policy being ignored. They can't understand that, and I think that's concerning. And the second is about design. Again, if you read the paper's comments from some of the amenity groups, it's really amazing how much agreement there is between the Wandle Forum, the Wandsworth Society, the Putney Society, and also the council's own Conservation Area Advisory Committee. So I think no one's very happy about this.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Councillor Boswell, for that question. And you're quite right. I know that it's in the public realm. And whilst I really, I think we and residents would really encourage that, and it's not a private gated, community, for example. At the same time, I think there are things that can be done. So people who who don't have any access to, a park, or their playground's been sort of historically very, very neglected, they're feeling there's nowhere to go, and they're saying yes, how lovely to have a new space to go to, but there are issues about the safety of getting young children there. So that's one issue. The other issue is something that people have raised before in other different developments, such as the Ram Quarter, which is the feeling that sometimes that people sort of feel, sort of an outdated model that children shouldn't be seen, they shouldn't be, that have joyful play, and they haven't been encouraged to be out on their micro scooters and so on. So I think something to sort of encourage inclusion would be a very good idea, to welcome people in. So I don't know what that would look like, whether it would be, events or some signposting from the set town centre into the area and into the Wandsworth Trail and these pocket parks. But also there's a very real need. So, yes, you've got King George's Park, available, but there's nowhere for children or young people to go if it is pouring with rain. And so to have some kind of community space or multi-use space with people have said that would be really welcome. So somewhere to go that's very welcoming, that draws in different elements of the community, have someone looking over them and facilitating activities to make sure that there is access for all. It is for Wandsworth residents as well as some people who
Thank you
will
very
be more
much,
privileged.
Councillor Davies. That's incredibly informative and helpful.
Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Govindia, Councillor for East Putney Ward. Both of you could answer this. In your engagement with residents, I know they do make comments in the paper here, what is their experience of using public transport, the trains and the buses, and what do they think, how do they think that experience will change when this development is built?
There have been long-running complaints from residents about the capacity of Wandsworth Town Station, and those go back many years. I can remember with applications for the home-based tower and the B&Q buildings that those were issues raised then. I think it's true to say that there is more capacity at Wandsworth Town Station now, and yet residents are concerned about the impact on their ability to get to work in the morning of so many new residents coming to the area. And I do think that there needs to be more done to address those travel concerns.
Councillor Davis, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, Wandsworth Town Station is going to have the new entrance. It's going to be accessible for people, and that that's in the pipeline. So that's certainly to be congratulated, and will make a huge difference to people. And I do know that the MP is in close contact with Network Rail and the Transport Minister.
Yeah, I think
people, okay, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I've raised that people, get stuck on buses, and people have talked about cycle safety. Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions to the councillors, can I say thank you very much for the two of you for presenting. I want to pose some large questions, but in just a couple of questions I hadn't covered, which we've not had any responses from yet, no chance yet. But I think Councillor Davis said, concerned about things like doctors' surgeries and, shall we say, civic infrastructure. The officer's got any comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just, in the committee report, section 16, it talks about impact on infrastructures, and it does specify, it does talk about how the environmental statement talked about estimated the number of primary age children, which would be 94, and secondary age with 42. The Council latest Children Committee report confirmed that there are continuous significant surplus capacity within the borough primary and secondary schools, with measures implemented to manage excess surplus capacity. hence the results being negligible. And also we noted the ability to fund education through SIL. Similarly, in healthcare, the development would result in equivalent of 0.75 full-time GPs. Again, the results were considered minor, and we also noted the lack of response from NHS during consultation period, and the ability to fund healthcare through SIL. Again, the application will have over 21 million in SIL, which can look at these infrastructure needs.
Okay, now accessibility, I know members want to ask about anyway, but both councils did, and indeed it's a major concern of mine. I think both councils did, to be fair. I think Councillor Davis expressed it quite well in saying pedestrian access in particular in all directions, it can feel like an isolated island. I'm concerned not so much about the rail transport, and British Rail have increased, British Rail, whoever it is, have increased the capacity by making 10 carriage trains and various other things like that. But I am concerned about the pedestrian crossing, most at all Swandon Way, but in all directions. So a view about pedestrian and cycling, for that matter, pedestrian and cycling accessibility to the site.
Can I refer to my colleague?
Yes, you certainly, sorry, I should say. Mr. Marshall.
Hello, Bill Marshall, Principal Transport Planner for Wandsworth Council. Regarding access for pedestrians and cyclists, I mean, it's at the moment the two main signalised pedestrian crossings of where Swandon Way meets Armoury Way, on its northern arm, that's still going to be there, crossing 4 lanes of traffic, and the existing crossing regarding giving access to Ram Street as well, and to Fairfield Street. So, I accept that it's not ideal to come out of a pedestrian egress and then have to walk southwards to a crossing and then cross, as the argument's sake, if you're going towards the station. And I accept that the access onto, if you live, let's say, in the northern part of Block B and you want to, your nearest pedestrian access point is onto Smuggler's Way, it's not ideal. But no, the main signalised pedestrian crossings that provide routes to the railway station and to South Wandsworth South Side are still in place. And we've also, TfL have requested around £352,000 to help improve the quality of the footways along Armoury Way and Swandon Way. So we kind of feel that given what's infrastructure is already there, we've kind of asked for as much as is feasible.
Are there any new traffic light controlled pedestrian crossings?
Not to be proposed as to mitigate the impact of this development, no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Hogging here, the members want their own say. There's a whole mass of areas that one could talk about. Design, massing, affordability, height, transport links. Open to Councillor Govinda. You want to start? Go on, far away.
Chair, just firstly to help you, because you were started on the issue of connectivity and transport, shall we exhaust that area of concern and then move to other areas? Otherwise, we'll be all over the place. Yeah. So if I take my transport concerns, firstly, the proposed changes to the one-way system will put more traffic onto Armoury Way and Swandon Way and less traffic on Old York Road, Fairfield Street and Wandsworth High Street. Does that make the current difficulties of crossing those roads greater? And is therefore any proposals to have additional crossing points when that scheme happens? And the second point I have is, it literally is about pedestrians. I mean, pedestrians will obviously be careful about where they put themselves at danger or not. But cyclists tend to want to cross the road as in a connecting way, connect from one side to the other. And most of the connecting routes seem to go right against the grain of traffic. You almost have to cross Swandon Way to get into this site, to get into Enterprise Way and beyond. So I just wonder whether there is a safe cycling way for cyclists to cross those two roads as well.
Mr. Tidley, do jump in if you feel you need to.
Yes, I thank you, Chair. So David Tidley, the Head of Transport Strategy. The scheme that's before the development that's before committee tonight effectively works with or without Transport for London's original plans to amend the Wandsworth one-way system. So we're comfortable with that. As Mr. Marshall said, there's also a contribution to TfL to improve the local quality of the footways, and the scheme would go to the Mayor for stage 2 comments as well, so TfL would get involved at that stage as well on ensuring that the conditions and obligations are the right ones. I think however the proposals might develop in the future with Transport for London on improvements to the one-way system, we know we need to do something there, and so I would imagine, irrespective of whether we end up with the existing highway as it is or Transport for London's plans or something else, there will be a need for us to work with TfL to ensure that, for example, bus routes are replanned in the area, because there's no northbound bus on Swandon Way, for example, and now that the development has happened in Home Base and this development as well, it would make sense to ensure a bus route is closer to that part of the world. Similarly, I'm sure that the cycle facilities in the area, the routing of cyclists would be revised accordingly as well. And one particular example would be, for example, I think that Swandon Way is the only bit of the red route in the area that's still 30 miles an hour, and it would clearly make sense to bring that speed limit down. But all those are things that we'll be working with Transport for London on as part of a sort of more placemaking in the Wandsworth context more generally, rather than specifically as a result of this development. But this development will be extremely helpful in making the case for greater investment in the area.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Councillor Apps, I'm Councillor for Shaftesbury Queenstown Ward. As somebody who got beeped by a driver today for riding primary position on the one-way system in order to try and keep my life continuing, I've got a lot of sympathy with the comments. It's a very dangerous route, and the sooner we can get that one-way system dealt with, the better. However, I think many of these issues, you're right, that there will be is part of a much bigger picture in terms of looking at those improvements. I did want to ask, though, about the improvements on the other side, which are improvements to the Wandle Way, which, although I think that residents have a hard deal of trying to get to Wandsworth Town and trying to use the bus routes, and those things have to be improved. But actually, for visitors to the area, we see considerable benefits, and I wondered if you could outline some of those.
I'm sorry, Councillor, can you please clarify what do you mean by the Wandle Way? You mean the Wandle Trail? All right.
I'm happy to take it. Yes, so as I suppose as well, thinking of the Wandsworth Riverside Quarter, and as that's developed, we've seen very relatively strong connections over the bridge there between Smugglers Way and that part of the world, and also down the causeway. So this linkage will actually, to a certain extent, partly address some of Councillor Govindia's concerns, because it would allow relatively safe pedestrian and cycle access over the Wandle, avoiding having to use the main road. And similarly, that bridge that currently exists also to some extent does that. One thing I did want to say, because I did forget, which was about new pedestrian crossings, because there is a crossing that's being installed, I think, as we speak, between the home base site and the B&Q site. And I'd imagine quite a lot of new residents who are in this location will also in time get to walk along Swandon Way across through the home base site to go into the station on the planned northern entrance. So there will probably be a movement that way and not just down to Old York Road as well.
Wouldn't want to think too many pedestrians would want to walk too far along the Swandon Way. It'd be a bit like walking along the M1, wouldn't it? I mean, but I take your point. The Scouts, are we still on, or do you want to move on? Scouts, White. Yeah, you're still talking about transport. Fine. Councillor White.
No, sorry. Yeah, I did want to move on, but I just wanted to say, yeah, it's you know, that is almost an urban motorway there just outside, and it does feel pretty imprisoning for the development to have that road outside. So the quicker we can sort that out and get as many crossings and try and calm the traffic as much as possible to make it as safe as possible, because you know, as Councillor Davies pointed out, there is a lot of children moving in there, and I worry a little bit.
Okay, still on transport. You're on transport too. Your small point, Councillor Govindia, then Councillor Golke, Councillor Humphreys.
And my small point is actually to Mr. Titley. Is there a minimum size width of a shared bicycle pedestrian walkway that you, in your transport experience, would propose? Because the Wandle Way, the Wandle Path trail, so goes from 6-something meters to 3.4 meters, and that narrowing, and then the narrowing of the bridge, I just feel creates conflict between the two users. And how can you avoid or minimize those conflicts?
I believe the London Cycle Design Standards is the minimum of 3 metres for a shared cycle and pedestrian route, but clearly you should be aiming for more than that, and to ensure that 3 metres, you know, that where you can get more you can, and that you don't have long distances of 3 metres or less.
What would be 3 is the minimum? What would be nice to have?
4.5 would be nice to have.
Councillor Golke.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering why there were
Councillor Golke from? Have you?
Yeah, I've already introduced myself, but I'm Councillor Cogley for St Mary's.
Sorry.
I was just wondering why there are so few short stay cycle spaces, because there's a lot of long stay and it seems like a very good amount, but I'm thinking we have, you know, the proposer has a backyard cinema, has music venues in the Arches. There's a lot of infrastructure and places that you know people would want to go and see, and after it being dilapidated for so long, it'd be really nice to have like a lot of these features that residents can come and see. But with only 6 short stay cycle spaces by Block B, that already seems like it's barely anything really. It would basically mean that if you want to go to the cinema or the Arches, you can't really cycle there. You'd have to get a bus because there'd be nowhere to hook your bike up.
There is, they have provided short stay cycle spaces in accordance with the London Plan standard. It's just, I admit, I agree that a lot of them are in it's kind of stuck in one place around between Block A1 and the railway arches. It's just, they're quite difficult to see on the master plan drawing.
Wait, so is this in addition to the short stay that's...
No, that's part of the short stay provision.
Yeah. So because it looks like in total it's 20 short stay spaces in the entire development, and that just does it, like, if it was just residential, I'd understand, because maybe there might be antisocial behaviour issues, but because there's going to be a lot going on here that's not just residential, it just seems quite short. And I don't know, like, could we try and encourage there to be more short stay cycle in the save, especially near the Arches and the backyard cinema?
Sorry, I missed it. On the same point, and these relatively new commercial electric bikes, are there spaces for those too?
And we can't specifically ask.
Sorry?
We can't, under the London plan, we can't sort of demand that.
No, I suppose we can't. Yeah, okay.
Developers provide space for electric bikes as things stand, but the London plan it will be reviewed in the future as well.
Excuse me, Chairman.
I don't want to keep going back on the point that maybe we should have this as at the very least as an informative to say, like, you know, make sure that there is enough sort of accessibility for these commercial units and that we need to sort of encourage people to cycle there if they want to.
I'll take a note of that at the end.
There is a condition, Ellen Richards, team leader for the West area. There is a condition, number 26, in the report that is requiring further details of all cycle parking to be submitted and approved. And I'm sure we can make a note of that in terms of overall provision, if that's felt to be a requirement.
Are you still on transport, Councillor Humphreys?
Thank you, Chair. Transport, Councillor Humphreys, Southfield Councillor in Putney. It's actually following on from Councillor Coulter's point as well about internal on the site, so it is transport, but that way round. So obviously it's a constrained site, and I can see the developers tried their hardest to try and squeeze everything that they need to, but I am concerned on the servicing and delivery bays and things like that. We've seen where those are. Mr. Barrow has told us where those are going to be, but and officers say in the report that they think that's adequate. But I'm wondering if that takes into account all the things that we get in the modern world. So not only the delivery vehicles that will be bringing stuff along, but also all the scooters and Deliveroo bikes and things like that are becoming in vast quantities on electric scooters and electric bikes. And how will they fit into the mix of how those pedestrian cycle areas, for example? I'm concerned that that's going to be very difficult to regulate in any kind of meaningful way to control their access around the site. And also when Mr. Badwani was saying about the servicing for the waste, he was saying that the idea is on plot B that the servicing bay will be used for putting the waste as it comes round out for be collected on whichever day it happens to be that it comes around. So if the service bay is taken up with the waste trucks, where will the service vehicles go? I think we could have a bit more detail, please, on how that's supposed to actually work in reality.
Yeah, and we did analyse the servicing trips using sort of TfL's latest guidance, plus a sort of a nationally recognised trip generation system for developments called TRIX. And yeah, in total, all the land uses in the development will, I think, create 234 servicing trips per 14-hour day. That includes, like you said, mopeds delivering pizzas and what have you, and the vehicular trips for servicing will peak at about 37. I think it's between 12 and 1 in the daytime, and it's of those, when you take into account all the 5 bays, and like you said, you're right that Block B, it has got a bay which on waste collection day is going to have to be used to some extent to put bins in, but there's also another lay-by to the east of Block B as well that can be used. Plus there's nothing to prevent people making deliveries to the western side of Block B to use one of the 3 bays that's just to the east of Block A2. Taking into account all the bays and all the vehicles arriving, there's 5 bays to accommodate an absolute maximum of 37 vehicles at the peak hour. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. That's how we'll just come back, Chair. That's all fine. I appreciate you can only work with the data sets you've got, and tricks and things like that are perhaps due a refresh in the real world. Close to me, there's a Deliveroo hub, and the volume of vehicles and mopeds and such like coming out of there on an hourly basis would knock your 200-odd deliveries out the sky as far as anything is going. The volume of buildings that we're going to have and residential units we're going to have here. My main concern, though, was not only just the delivery bays, but managing it, because how are we going to be sure that those scooter guys are going to pop their bikes nicely and responsibly in the delivery bay and not zoom across those lovely pedestrian pathways and cycleways and stop outside Block A and do their A1 and do their deliveries like that? You know, it's the management of it as well, which is a safety concern, let alone just a capacity issue.
Perhaps I could come in there, Chair.
Sorry?
Perhaps I could come in there quickly. I think this was very much a case where we were extremely keen to ensure that there was dedicated servicing locations as set out on the plan to avoid a position that you can have and can work quite well in developments where servicing can take place amongst development without being dedicated because of the nature of the development and the space you're working with. This was very much one where we needed to identify formal areas for servicing in order to protect the public realm and the pedestrian movements. And that's what we've sought to achieve here. Plus, again, going back to, as Ms. Richards said in the previous response as well, there is another condition to ensure that the servicing and delivery plan comes to us and is effectively implemented and maintained thereafter. So.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. That's fine, but it doesn't address the point. But who will enforce it?
Well, Councillor Humphreys, we've got lots of examples of this now, haven't we? And we've Battersea Power Station, River Light, the rest of Swandon Way. We've developed systems, one way or another, that handles deliveries and servicing, so on. I think the officers know the problems. You've exposed them, fair enough. Are we still on the same subject, councillors?
Kind of, but kind of moving on to.
Well, I was going to move on, actually, but where do you want to move on to?
Okay, I'm Finna Ayres, East Putney councillor. I think a lot of these problems that we've been talking about is because there simply is not enough ground left. We haven't got enough ground left for the width of paths that would avoid conflict of pedestrians and cyclists. We haven't got enough ground left for playground. We haven't got enough ground left for parking bays, cycling bays. And in all other cases with a submission like this, we would have said, it's an overdevelopment. Now, in my case, I would be happy with an overdevelopment if we get this public housing. I would do a trade on that happily. And though I wanted to go on to talk about the public housing, right. But if you forbid that, I will accept it.
No, that's what I wanted to go on to. The volume of affordable and private housing, yes.
Well, quite seriously, the only thing that makes me shut my eyes to the 29-storey block and all these other problems I've mentioned are the public housing provision, which I think would be marvellous. I would be very pleased to say yes to this proposal because of the amount of public housing and the fact that a lot of it is the London rent, not in the immediate. However, I see that the planning permission is going to be developed in co-partnership with a registered provider, and that the developers are struggling to find a registered provider. Now, this will therefore don't look like that, Mr. Calder. That's what they said.
Well, no, but that's not quite what they said. For periods of transparency, we had a site visit where members of the committee attended the site visit on Monday and heard an introduction and an overview from the applicants in which they talked about the affordable housing and how they have a registered provider who has interest in it, except at this stage, because the intention is that once permission is granted, if it's granted, that they will come back with the reserved matters in association with the housing association. And that's the order that they're doing it in. That's why we've got the application partly an outline. Sorry, you want to come back? Sorry, but I just wanted to correct the point that unlike a lot of developments, they have actually got interest from housing providers.
Interest is not the same as commitment, as we all know. And
it's a valid concern. Make your point.
Well, it worries me that it will delay the planning application in detail, which has to be done as part of the condition. I don't know what can be done about this, but delaying it adds to the length of time it's going to take to get it as far as on site. That will take some years, and in all those several years of getting it, all the details in drawing form, all the building work on site, economics change in that time. And I'm very concerned that we will have a repeat of what we had a few meetings ago, where a public housing provision was changed and completely obliterated because the economics had changed and it was no longer viable. So I'm worried about late viability on this scheme. And as that's the only reason that I would support this scheme, despite the fact that there are many good things to recommend it, and thank you, by the way, for that site visit, very helpful. I don't know how you can, I don't know what can be written in to avoid late application for a reduction in the public housing.
Well, I mean, at one level, of course, the answer is nothing. I mean, if we pass this planning application tonight, there's nothing stopping the very same applicants coming back with a different mix, and that is always a possibility. Unlikely, I think, but it's always a possibility. So in that sense, we can't stop that happening. But you know, I think that the developer probably wants to get on with this scheme, and they will find it much easier to get a registered provider interested if we decide to permission. Then there'll be a real scheme that they can talk to the developers about. Sorry, who? Mr. Turner, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Hi everyone, yes, I'm Debbie Turner. I'm the Principal Development Viability Officer, and I just wanted to provide a little bit of extra information that may help a little bit. But essentially, one of the requirements that, yes, they have gone down the fast track route on this application, which then would mean that we wouldn't be able to enforce a late stage review. But it does mean that if they don't start on site within 24 months, they would then have to undergo an early review, which would then obviously, they would then have to go through another viability review, more viability assessment, which obviously is something that the developer will not want to do. So that time period is quite a strong incentive for them to essentially get on with the development, not have to go through any of those further discussions. So that we are hoping that will then mean that they will crack on with this. As Nick Calder mentioned earlier, that yes, there is an interested registered provider. Obviously, we would need to go through the process with them, as they're not currently on the list of preferred registered providers for the council, but it's something that housing officers have been talking to them, and obviously they will have to go through that process of being added to that list. But it is the nature of the economy at the moment, and the fact that there is an interested registered provider is a significant benefit at the moment. So I think this is again where the applicant would want to move forwards quicker, where they have got an interested registered provider on site. Thank you.
Councillor White, Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I just got an email from the applicant saying that they have three RPs interested in the site, not just one. So.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor White, Councillor Govindia.
Councillor White, Tooting Beckwall. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself before, but when Finna Ayres speaks, then things happen, don't they? That email was received double quick. So yeah, I have similar concerns, but as Councillor Ayres put forward, I was also a little bit disappointed that we're 51 affordable short of going 50% on this. But as Councillor Ayres did say, the London living rent is intermediate without any shared ownership, which I think is fantastic, and we should have been doing that a long, long time ago, I think. But there is something in the Wandsworth, I think it's the Wandsworth Society comments, that talks about there's a significant financial deficit. That's not in the papers, so maybe that could be spoken about. Maybe that's incorrect. I'm worried about all along the river about off-book sales and foreign investment in inverted commas rather than people actually living there. And I was wondering what the current experience of the locality, so that with the RAM development, what is the experience there. But yeah, I think that's as far as I want to take it at the moment. Yeah.
Just on the first point, Councillor White, the paper does say that if decontamination costs, etc., were particularly high, then that would be a reason to allow a lower level of affordability. Well, as you know in the paper, it says decontaminations cost just under 19 million. So I think it qualifies on that count. But that on that particular, on the other housing issues that Councillor White mentioned, like what the take up is in the RAM site, do we have any comments about that? Anyone? No one from the housing department? It's a good question, but I'm not sure we've got anyone who could tell you the answer.
Yeah, no, great question. I'm afraid we haven't got any detail here on the take-up from the RAM, but more than happy to ask my other housing colleagues about that. Yes. Yeah, of course.
I mean,
yeah.
The take-up on all these sites, the RAM's a good one, but obviously through the whole of Nine Elms is an issue that concerns us all, I know. Councillor Apps again.
Sorry, there's the other also about, I know you touched on it, but I didn't read about the significant financial deficit in the paper. Could we spread some light on that?
That was a comment from Wandsworth Society. Anyone know anything about that?
Yes. So obviously with the applicants, with their initial offer, when they first submitted the application, which was based on 20% affordable housing and then 20% with grant, so they then did need to provide viability information with that. But then when they upped their offer, that it would be 40% on the basis of, regardless of grant, they then didn't need to provide further viability information with that. So essentially that means that there isn't a formally agreed viability position, but that's essentially the route that they're allowed to take when they go through the fast track route. So although in those kind of initial assessments there was a deficit, obviously that's always the initial viability assessment that's submitted generally has a fairly large deficit. However, that viability position wasn't agreed as they then changed their offer.
So Councillor Ayres has got every reason to be very worried about this. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say that there is a real concern. Obviously, how the applicants put their information forwards. Our viability consultants that considered it had quite a different view. So I would say that at the moment, there just isn't a viability position that was agreed just because of being able to use that fast track route. So we can't really definitely confirm exactly what the applicant's position is.
Councillor Apps?
Yeah, I was a bit concerned by something I just heard, because I also read about the decontamination costs of, I think it's 19 million. But presumably, I was working on the basis that had already been taken into account in terms of what affordable homes are being offered. I just want some assurance on that. I also just wanted to, Councillor White reminded me that there was a comment in the Wandsworth Society about the existing flood risk assessment not being sufficient because it didn't take into account the undergoing review from the Environment Agency on flood risk. But when's that, is anybody aware of when that review's due? I mean, is it imminent? Is there a reason to think that we could get the results now, or is that something for the future?
On the 18 million, it was me saying that that had already been taken into account effectively and was why the application is as it is. So it's already been taken into account, hasn't it? The contamination, yes. So on the second part of Councillor App's question.
Yeah, it was really to ask if anybody knew when the Environment Agency's new assessment of flood risk was going to be available.
No, but the Environmental Agency has been part of the discussions on this application, and they responded very extensively about the proposal. Yeah, that's all I get. And in relation to confirmation of affordable housing offer, it will be done under Section 106 agreement. Everything that they said they will do will be agreed to in a legal agreement. If there's any change, the application will have to come back to this committee to approve anything other than what's agreed.
Could perhaps we could make a note that we can remind any future committee that this committee was very determined that the affordable homes should be protected when it comes back, because I'm afraid we've all got, I don't know if I'd call it PTSD, maybe post affordable home trauma from past encounters such as Battersea Power Station, and we don't want to see any repeats.
Noted. I think. Now, all the comments, all the headings I put down have been covered, with the exception really of height. The only person who's mentioned height is Councillor Ayres in her. Of course, in a sense, if Councillor Ayres given the say, then it's the final say, as Councillor White's already pointed out. But does anyone else want to say anything about height? Councillor Govindia Cole.
Just whilst you're dealing with housing and affordability.
Sorry?
Just whilst you're dealing with housing and affordability. Okay. When calculating affordability rent levels, will they be inclusive of service charges? Because one of the issues often is that the service charges make affordable rent unaffordable accommodation in a sense. The second question is that the reference to communal space and spa and such like in Block B. Will that be accessible to all residents of the development? Again, there have been situations where some are allowed and some are not allowed. So it's important to understand that. And the third point, which is about the early stage viability review. Now, it says that it will, if development has not occurred within 24 months of approval, so presumably approval will mean post 106 being engrossed. I see Mr. Badawi nodding, so that's helpful. But is there then not, in fact, a risk that the early stage viability review at that stage could in fact be faced with different economic circumstances, and the figures that we are agreeing today, both in terms of the overall quantum as well as the split between 10 years and so on, could shift?
So if I just quickly answer that question first on the early stage review. So generally, an early stage review mechanism is implemented on substantial implementation. So obviously there are normally clear specific rules within the Section 106 what that substantial implementation is, and that's normally site specific as well. So in addition, early stage reviews are purely uplift only. So if, for example, outside factors do mean that the viability position has worsened, then that doesn't remove any of the affordable housing requirement. It's not essentially an extra risk mechanism for the developer. It's upward only. Yes. So I'll answer your other question about service charge. So in relation to London living rent, there are controls that essentially the rent and the service charge must be 40% of income. So there are controls in relation to that. In relation to social rent, there are very strict controls in relation to the rent. So that is basically calculated on a formula done by the government, which is based on local house prices, average incomes. But essentially the service charge associated with social rents aren't controlled in that strict way.
So in a sense, that is my question, because there is a lot of correspondence, commentary in the housing press about housing associations, service charges going up on a cyclical basis, making accommodation unaffordable. Is there any way in which you can write this in at this stage, or is that not possible?
Unfortunately, it's not really possible at this stage to write that in, but obviously the design of the site will help with service charge, as obviously, especially that the social rented units being in their own block, that will massively help in terms of the management and keeping those service charges low. Yes. Yeah.
In terms of communal facilities within Block B, as far as we know, they are for residents of Block B only. They're not accessed by other residents in the development, including Block A1.
Other hands were up. I think Councillor Humphreys, and maybe that was it. Councillor Humphreys.
It's just still on affordable, if I can, that's the last thing. So just to remind colleagues, at the moment we've only got Block A2 and A3 in outline. So we've just got the broad parameters of the dimensions pretty much, haven't we? So I'm concerned, and noting that we've made some comments already tonight that the applicant's obviously hearing, it would be useful to remind the applicant that although that's got to come back for a decision later on, I'm concerned that already on Block A3, that's where all the refuse is already for the entire development. And we've also got already some talk about single aspect units in some of the blocks that are in full spec, let alone outline spec. So again, I wouldn't want to see a degradation of standards on those affordable parts of the development. I'd like to see that they maintain an equality with the rest of the development on the sense of double aspect units as we expect in policy and every other standard that we expect. I wouldn't want to see a diminution in any other way in what comes forward in the future.
You comment, yes, indeed. Councillor Colkey.
Thanks. I also had a similar concern. I noticed that, Block A3 is where Block A3 seems to be the bin building and where the refuse has been collected. And, if that makes sense logistically, then that's fine. But because it's an outline permission, it worries me a bit, because also we haven't secured yet also the details of how we're going to do food waste recycling. And so then if we need separate bins, I assume they would also be in Block A3, and then suddenly we have all of this room for bin storage that's encroaching on the land which was meant to be used for building the housing. So I guess I don't know if that's a comment, or if officers have any reassurance that A3 with the outline would still be able to have the capacity to deliver all of the housing, even if the need for it.
Sounds to me very much like a comment, but people might have a comment about your comment, or no, not particularly. Just slightly off the subject. No, not off the subject. It's just speculatively. I realise there's all sorts of ifs and buts, but there's the Section 106 to be signed, and GLA approval, and what would an optimistic date for anything actually happening in a real sense in spades in the ground?
Well, I think going back to the consent, we've put in place requirements that the reserve matters applications are brought forward for the affordable housing at an early stage, and again that it's built out and occupied before they can use the tower, for instance. So it's making sure that there is a good phasing plan to bring everything forward. In terms of the consent itself, if we resolve to grant tonight, and I'm not prejudging any outcome that you might make, It needs to be referred to the GLA in any case. If it's approved, it tends to come back to us quite quickly. If it were to refuse, they would probably look at whether they need to call it in, and would be a similar process as you recall from the Springfield Hospital. So there would be a possible delay there depending on the outcome. If subject to when the decision is resolved to be, we would try and get the Section 106 done as quickly as possible with the assistance of Mr. Moores besides. But we tend to have a clause which they have to sign that within 6 months, and if not, we can refuse it. And we have used that weapon on a number of occasions. So there is that cut-off point, and then the Reserve Matters application will probably be in pretty quickly after that. They'll, subject to any resolution, they would probably be discussing with their now 3 RPs, registered providers, to bring this forward. So hopefully that gives you a sort of idea.
So, the simple bit, everything goes reasonably well. When do spades hit the ground? 3 years?
Well, I think they'd be looking within 2 years to avoid the early stage review.
Well, I think there are certain I think we've had a fairly good discussion. I'm sure it could always be better, but a fairly good discussion. And clearly members have got some concerns, being refuse collection being one, pedestrian crossings across Swandon Way being others. Maybe other things will develop. But I think we've had a reasonably good discussion. I was just thinking we're coming to an end, but Councillor White's trying to persuade, lots of people. Gosh, what a mistake that was. Right, okay. Well, why are you all so reticent? I'm sitting here wondering what's going on. Right. Can you give me an idea of how much longer you want to be?
I don't think my questions will last for that long.
Well, you're always quite quick. You're one of the quicker ones, I noticed, Councillor White, so you far away.
Why is everyone laughing? I have a worry as well about when another block, and quite rightly put out that it told us about the service charges, and the management of the block is quite easy by having it separate. But it worries me about the quality of materials that will be used, and will they be different? Will it look different? Recent experience of other developments seem to indicate that the fixtures and fittings aren't of the quality of the private housing. Which causes big problems afterwards. And there's interesting that there's talk about the wind speeds on page 30, and the window fixings can be very affected by that. So, as I say, I'm just worried that we might be building in problems here into social rented housing rather than the rest of the development. But there was also other things as well. It's interesting about the car club spaces. I wasn't sure how many. Legislation seems to dictate there would be 3 or 4 spaces, which is good. But, is that enough? There's a lot of, if we're going to encourage people away from owning their own cars, and this is car-free, I believe, isn't it? So. And then the other thing is that there's coming up quite a lot. Sheila said that's free. I think I've got 4 questions actually, so strap yourself in. There's a line on page 88 that talks about a sensitive lighting strategy aimed at minimising impacts on bats, which is good. But is that a tension with safety of the area as well? And I wanted to know also what is the proportion powered by the air source heat pumps, and what is the proportion that the energy will be heated by gas, please. Thank you.
Some of that sounds a little bit detailed at this stage. I'm not sure. Can officers got any replies to those?
To answer your question, we do want there to be a car club space provided. It's council policy at the moment to provide one space per the first 100 dwellings, and then subject to the provider considering additional spaces to be viable, one per 200 thereafter. So at this stage, that's what we've asked for in the section 106. So the priority will be to deliver the one per the first one first.
It's pretty low. I mean, in terms of, I mean, okay, there's a lower car ownership and car usage in London than almost any other city in the country, and not surprisingly, but it's still lower than the average in the borough, isn't it? So it's still motivating people away from cars, whatever the figure is. It's quite low, which is what you're after. So I'm not sure where this is going.
It seems low. I can understand its policy, but it just seems a bit slow. And there will be blue badge provision as well. So
yes.
Yeah. That's one down.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. The second question was about the sensitive lighting. Sensitive lighting, yes, it's required to not affect bats and their foraging routes. That doesn't mean that it will affect pedestrians. It goes to a certain level that it should, and a certain height. So that will be discussed with the biodiversity officer, as well as the Met Police will be involved in lighting strategy, and the transport colleagues as well. So yeah, the lighting strategy will involve different people talking together. It wouldn't just be taking care of one thing and ignoring the others. I'm sorry I missed your question about the heating or the energy. What was?
Yeah, I wondered what the proportion of heating, because it's a hybrid system, isn't it? Part powered by gas and part by air source heat pumps. So I wondered what was the proportion. Is it will the gas only kick in sort of Arctic conditions, or is it something that will be used all the time? Do we know that? I asked the developer on Monday. He didn't know. So I expect you will.
The information I retain at the moment is the site will have centralized energy center that will produce energy for the site with what we calculate as carbon offset on the site. The technical details I can get for you later. But the energy assessment, be seen will be part of section 106, which will mean that there will be monitoring to what the energy efficiency on site will be. As well.
So it might not be. So it might not be air source heat pumps at all. It might just be.
Sorry, you're getting a bit like a two-way conversation here. I'm not sure the rest of the world is quite there. So
I'm sure they're
speak up, please.
Okay. Yeah. If you can if you can give me that information, that'd be great. And I think that was there was another one, wasn't there?
Sorry, there was the points about materials that you were concerned about. Those are covered by condition, and for the outline buildings, they'd be part of the reserved matters that would have to be approved.
Sorry, just to add, I think there's a design code as well across the site, isn't there? So that would ensure at least the externals are of a quality. Internally, that will be done within association with the housing association that came in. So there would be further agreement for fixtures and fittings. Sorry,
I just got an answer to your question, councillors. It will be 90% air source heat pumps on site and 10% gas.
Okay. How long have we been sitting? I'm not complaining. I'm just wondering whether anyone wants a break. Is that okay?
Sorry, Councillor. Can I finish on a bombshell that if Councillor White, if you turn to page 13.13, found by my right honourable solicitor, it'll answer your question about proportions of the energy centre.
Sorry, where is it?
Paragraph 1313 on page 93.
Okay. Obviously didn't read that, sorry.
I have been asked for a break. In that case, we will have to have a break. And none of your 5 minutes. I want everyone back very quickly. So, quick break, please.
A few moments later.
Now, there were 3 other people who had their hands up for questions, I think. But anyway, they can add more if you want. But Councillor Boswell was one, yes. Councillor Boswell.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I wanted to actually go back. Karim, it was your response to the presentations, and I think you went to 16.4, 16.5, particularly I'm interested in. One is to ask a question about process and another about stage. So this, for example, is about healthcare. And I note, it says, officers note lack of response from the NHS during consultation period. So are we reactive only? Do we not proactively, with hundreds of people on this site, a question around whether there is GP surgery capacity in the area would be pretty important. Do we just wait to see if the NHS respond?
I contacted the officer working in our area who responded to the application next door, and I reminded him of this application, and they still haven't done it, and I reminded him twice.
Thank you very much. And the other part of my question is, and I note the other part of that sentence says, ability to fund healthcare through SIL. So at what stage would that happen? Would that be noticed that the capacity wasn't there, and then SIL access to make that happen?
The SIL process is outside the planning process. There is a separate board that dictates SIL both locally and on infrastructure level. So it would have to go through that rather than through this. So it would be highlighted maybe by ward councillors that there was an issue, and then we could, that I presume, could look at that.
Thank you. Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. If I was a concerned resident, watching this meeting,
which of course you are. Watching this meeting.
Yeah. I'd be very perplexed that we've sat here for 2 hours and we've talked about everything under the sun except the thing that's most concerning to residents, as Councillor Sweet raised in his comments at the beginning. The heights, the volume, the scale, the fact that it contravenes most of our policies. We haven't talked about any of those issues at all yet.
Well, Councillor Ayres did mention it, and I mentioned that she did mention it. I was waiting for someone to raise it.
Well, okay, here we go. And the serious point here is what Councillor Sweet said, is that residents find it increasingly concerning, evidently, that we have our policies, and we're always very strict that we're guided by our policies when we're making our decisions here at the Planning Committee. And in this particular instance in front of us tonight, it contravenes, I think it's 4.11, isn't it, which says it quite succinctly, contravenes so many of our policies. It's outstanding. I mean, besides the whole basis of WT4 and LP4 that we've talked about, I've just made a little list of some of the things as we were going along. So we've got, 39% in Block B, non-compliant on sunlight, daylight, non-compliant on private amenity space, non-compliant on play space, some single aspect units. We haven't even got onto the heights and things like that. So in the SPD, we're talking from 4 to 10 stories. And the justification, it seems like, from officers is mainly that, it's a changing world around us, and the prevailing characteristics around the area have changed, and then what they're providing on site, although we've picked a few holes in what they're providing on site already so far tonight, haven't we, folks? But I just was questioning that justification of the changing context around the site, because our local plan, which this contravenes massively, is only dated 2023, and in fact there's currently a revision on the local plan coming through this council where there was a chance to amend it, and there was nothing considered worthy of amending on this aspect of the SPD or the local plan as far as this area was concerned. So it's obviously even in the last year considered appropriate. We knew about the Ram Brewery site and the big tall tower that's going there. We knew about Swandon Way and the development that's happened there long before this SPD was drawn up by very diligent officers at the council that we worked with ourselves, some of us, through that process, and came up with a very well thought through and cohesive local plan. And here it just seems like, oh, well, that doesn't matter, because the overriding thing is we're going to get some affordable housing, and everything else, as Councillor Ayres said, doesn't really matter as long as we get the affordable housing. So hang the height, 29 stories as opposed to 10 stories. The lowest element of this development is 12 stories, the lowest element, let alone when the SPD talks about 4 to 10 stories. I just think it's a joke, really, and I can completely understand how the public lose faith in the council when we come forward with policy, big, strong, important policies, we're not talking about little details here, and then completely override it when we think it suits us to do something appropriate, or the developer thinks we can get away with it. So I just think on all those grounds, it's not acceptable at all.
Councillor.
And if there's a question in there, that how can officers justify the changing context when all that was well known in place when the local plan was put there?
Well, I think perhaps we will ask officers a point, but frankly, I do think that's a political question in all sorts of ways, and I'd be prepared to give it a go at some point or other. But Councillor Apps.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention this aspect of it because I read the papers about it being a waymarking point. I considered all the options. I considered the design. I was very mindful when I was looking at this that my husband, when he was MP for Battersea, actually had the Ram Brewery application called in to the Secretary of State. And so obviously this council and councillors on this committee haven't consistently voted against tall buildings, that is for sure. And we've got a 36-storey building coming in for the Ram Brewery. So the fact is that we look at these on balance and we look at the public good and the scheme and design as a whole, and we consider whether or not that we think that the height is in keeping. I'm also very mindful of the state that the current site is in, the fact that it requires a huge amount of investment in order to make it usable as a site. And so I'd be interested to know in what the officers thought about the balance of those arguments.
I think officers, I mean, what would you like to respond? I'd thank Councillor Apps for a response because I was going to say something similar. I may do in a minute anyway, but officer response?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Apps. Definitely everything you said is taken in balance. The cost of bringing the site back in use are really high, which necessitates higher development margin. And on the local plan issue, just a reminder that PM2, as part of it says tall building will only be acceptable form of development to tall building zones. After that, it says development proposals will need to relate appropriately to the specific context of the site, existing buildings in the locality and any other tall building proposals in the area, including schemes with an extant planning permission. So the fact that we're looking at the context and we're saying that the context is changing and changing the baseline for what mid-rise and high build, what tall buildings are, is not disregarding the policy. It's still looking at part of what the policy is. So we have two parts of the policy. One is saying it isn't a tall building zone, part of the site. Part of block A1 overlaps with a mid-rise zone. We gave justifications for why A1 is where it is. I hope you take that in balance. So it isn't a tall building zone. What goes against the policy is how high it should be. The justification for the height it should be is coming from all the other aspects. And can I just one thing was said in the beginning of the meeting in relation to paragraph 411. The Council and GLA would assess the application as non-compliant with the location and planned requirements of Part B in London Plan Policy, as it fails to meet the full requirement of Local Plan LP4 in terms of proposed height range. The part that was missed from that paragraph is nonetheless for scrutiny purposes. So that I started my assessment with why we're accepting the height, but saying nonetheless, even though if you don't want to accept the height, let's look with scrutiny at what a tall building should be. And the GLA have guidance on what we should look at when we're assessing tall buildings in terms of environmental impacts, impacts on designated views, and the design of the building. And we go into the assessment of these things and we find that the building is acceptable. So,
to respect Mr. Bedwari, that's your opinion, and we're allowed to have a different opinion. That's why the planning committee is here.
Well, that's okay, but he's made it. He's given his view. I want to talk about this in two different ways. One, not much to do with this application. I apologise to those in the public gallery who are most concerned about that. And that's to do with the use of guidelines in the first place and what I think government policy is pushing the other way. Councillor Abt says it finds it peculiar because of what her husband did before. I find it peculiar because of known positions that I've taken for years, and you two in the front there particularly who know about it. And I've also the positions you've taken in the past on many occasions. How many times I've sat and heard you say, these are just guidelines, and meanwhile, Councillor Burton, how about a 23-storey block on the corner of Calvert Road, or similar? I can barely count, and they've been used as guidelines.
It's your turn now, Councillor Belson.
Yeah, quite. I'm trying to justify it, which I don't think you did, but I am actually trying to justify it. But before I do, I was going on to say the government seems to be plotting, bringing forward a policy which is suggesting that one has to stick very much closer to the borough plan issues as defined than has historically been the case. In which case, all of us are going to have to spend much more time talking about planning policy and making sure that we get the guidelines right in the first place. Because this will go both up and down, the argument is. You go both upwards and downwards. So the kind of plans that we've had for the last 50, 60 years, to my knowledge, where they have been guidelines, will have to be much more precise in future, I think. I think that's the way it looks as though it's going. Conversations with Councillor Vindia would suggest that he's had more or less the same view as I, and indeed, I think Mr. Caldas has that view as well. So it says a lot about our plan making in the future. But in the meantime, you find the position we're taking odd, and I've said it about you in the past. I think the justification in this particular case is partly to do with the extreme costs of this site, and partly to do, frankly, with the change in the nature of the area. And it has changed, there's no question about that. All sorts of pretty high-rise buildings are there, and this is right next to a railway line, which in itself is a few stories high. And I think it probably fits in there as well as anywhere, and probably is needed for justification and the viability given the costs. So slightly unwillingly, that's where I get to, which I think is a less elegant way of saying what Councillor Abbs was saying, really. I think that's why I get to the position that I think I'm going to be in. Anyway, any other comments on that issue? Councillor, sorry.
Bring in Mr. Moores.
And I'm now being told I can't say all that. Mr. Moores.
Absolutely not, Chairman. I wasn't going to contradict anything you said. I was just going to address Councillor Humphrey's point. I get what you're saying about it may look odd to members of the public that a scheme of this, with a tower of this size, is being recommended for approval, despite the fact that it's in breach of LP4, policy LP4. The legal position is that the development plan has primacy, so it has to be considered, and an application has to be in accordance with that development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So an application need not comply with every policy in the local plan in order to get a favourable recommendation for approval. There are other matters that can be taken into account, and often you'll see them set out in the papers there. So the starting point is the local plan. It's the council's carefully stated planning spatial policy, but for the reasons set out in the report, officers who very carefully considered the scheme consider that the height of the tower, A1, and any harms that may flow from that height are, in the balance, outweighed by the policy compliant elements of the scheme, but also the benefits that the scheme's bringing. I think, in my view, most notably, the need for housing and also the 40% affordable housing. So I hope that addresses a little bit the concerns that members of the public may have when looking at the paper and says, okay, it's far too big for policy LP4, how can it be recommended for approval? It's not quite as linear as that. There are lots of considerations, as I know you know.
Thank you, Mr. Moores. I appreciate that that was for the public's benefit rather than mine necessarily. But I just think, yes, we all understand the principle that policies are there to guide, and we frequently go outside policy on particular specifics when we think it's relevant and it's going to increase in a better thing. But in this particular application, that's the point I was making. It isn't just the height, it's all the other elements. And what the committee is here to do, forgive me, officers, is for us to make our decision about where that balance is and whether we've got the right balance in the application before us. And that's our decision under officers' advice and guidance and recommendation, but we don't necessarily have to follow that advice.
Councillor Goldley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this application has been quite difficult for me because I didn't get elected to support a 29-storey tower, and I don't think any of us here, if given the choice, have the tower there or not have the tower there, we wouldn't pick to have the tower there. For me, it's like Officer has said, it's the balance, and I can't see how it would be feasible if we only developed 4 to 10 stories on that site. I don't think any private developer would ever pick it up, and so we went there for the site visit, and it was a complete wasteland. It's just this big drum with water at the bottom, and it's sad. And there's so many areas, especially in that section of Wandsworth Town, that there's not enough greenery. There's no coherence. You can't really walk through it very well, and it just looks like urban sprawl, and I don't think that's good for anyone's mental health, as well as denying potential residents the chance to live there, especially 40% affordable, which seems like, considering a really good deal that the officers have negotiated. I saw that in the application, and this is sort of related to what I was saying, there was no section on sort of amenity impacts, because normally when we have an application we have sort of daylight effects and overlooking, and I was wondering, since this section wasn't in there, was it because especially the 29-storey tower, is that far enough away from other residential developments that it will have no noticeable impact on daylight or overlooking?
Yes,
well, if I'm given the opportunity to speak, I'll say something else. We talked about context and everything, but one interesting point is paragraph 125 of the MPPF, notably part C, which talks about planning decisions, and in particular says, gives substantial weight to the value of using suitable brownfield land within settlements for homes and other identified needs, proposals for which should be approved unless substantial harm would be caused, and support appropriate opportunities to remediate despoiled, degraded, derelict, contaminated or unstable land. To my mind, this is an ideal site that complies with the requirements of the paragraph 125C in the MPPF, and that's part of the planning balance that we as officers have made. And as you said, councillors may make a different decision, but that's the policy framework that we've got. Sorry, back to Karim for amenity.
Thank you. Section 8 talks about the amenity impact, and it is what you thought, Councillor, because the site is part of a larger site allocation and it sits in the middle of it. And the distances between, for example, Block B and the Delta site, well, with the road and with another separation distance on the other side will be enough to alleviate any concerns on future development. Looking at the amenity impact on the site itself, we found that the proposal doesn't have impact on the amenity of future occupiers within itself. But also the site WT4 itself sits across the river from another site allocation on Frogmore. The distance between the distance of the Wandle Trail, Riverside Park, and the river will alleviate any concerns with anything coming on that side. And it also sits with the railway to the north, and that railway goes to WT10, which sits behind the railway line, which is another site allocation, and part of the requirements for this site allocation includes revitalization of the railway arches and continuation of the Wandle Trail, and provision of open space along the river as well. So if any potential developments to maintain an offset area from the railway similar to Block A, the distance between Block A and any building coming up, not to mention that there is existing substation anyway, will be 35 meters plus. So that will be enough to alleviate concerns. So the site has a unique, probably the only advantage they have, that they sit within the middle of nowhere, and anything coming around them will have to look at what they did and design around it as well. Not to say that they are taking all the extent of development across the site and making it harder for other developments to come.
Okay, I think, well, I'm sure we all have our opinions. We always talk about a particular issue, but unless something new, have we got any other? Councillor Govindia.
Something new and different. Firstly, perhaps Mr. Calder could comment on why this application has taken such a long time, having been originally lodged in December 22. And the second thing, and this is because we've had previous discussions on these two items and I don't want to see them lost. One was about the short stay bike in condition 26. Could that actually be expanded to cover Lime bikes or equivalent? I mean, I don't mean Lime bikes alone, but those type of bikes. Because inevitably people using their late night or evening facilities will travel by that, and you don't want them dumped all over the place. You want them placed in a proper place, and I think that should be included in the condition 26. And the second is that we did talk about the noise of these paladins of waste being transported from A1 to whatever. And these things move at all sorts of antisocial hour. Can be noise-related conditions, and I don't see any one particular on those paladins, but there are several noise-related conditions. Can those be expanded to include some sort of limit on how much noise or what hours they could be moved? Because Councillor Ayres and I have had some casework of somebody being woken up at antisocial hours when the bin lorry arrives. So I just think those two matters of detail, if they could be picked up. I can't believe they're contentious, but Mr. Calder could tell us about why it's taken such a long time.
I kick off with the highlights, and then Ms. Richards might add in. But the scheme itself was submitted after a lot of negotiation. However, we felt it wasn't in a situation at that point. We went through a long series of meetings. There's been various amendments, and as recently as October 2024, we had a revised scheme which brought down the heights and looked at the affordable housing. So it's been an evolution of this site. It's not the same as when it was submitted in December 2022. It's substantially changed. We've got different uses. There's changes to the design of Block B, Block A, and Block A1 and A2 and A3 have also changed. So there's been a lot of changes, and we've moved it on. Is there anything to add to that?
I just wanted to sort of talk really about, because we've been involved in this from pre-app, I'd imagine from 2020. And so, it's 2022 when it was submitted, validated early 23. It's been a long journey, definitely. But I would like to say also one of the crucial elements of the overall scheme that has taken some time, as has been set out in the report, the site itself has a various number of landowners, some who are interested in developing, others not. But one of the key aspects of it really, in order to ensure that it would future-proof, if you like, for any future gyratory changes that have been touched on already, is that the route through the site would work, that the two sites or the different elements of the site could come forward and operate successfully and sort of jigsaw together, if you like, in future. We already know that there's another site to the south of this site, which is live and under consideration, which you will eventually have to consider. But that was a crucial element that took a long time, because part of the Section 106 will be a land swap, essentially, to ensure that the route through the site is maintained and retained for future. Height certainly was a big issue, and at pre-app and throughout the scheme, the heights have well exceeded what officers felt comfortable with as well. What we have felt where we could make a concession really was on the tower, if you like, because of its location, because of where it is near the railway arches, because it sits with the riverside quarter in the background as well. The one that we were concerned about particularly were the two blocks being overlooking the river and wanting that to still retain some kind of human scale, but also the actual rotunda building, if you like, the gas holder, that was in excess of 17 stories when it first came in, and that to us felt way too excessive in that location, and because we were coming closer to the smaller scale of Fairfield and Old York Road. So combined, I think, again, as has been mentioned a number of times, it really is a case of balancing all the things in the round, really, to come to this point. So I just wanted to really emphasise that it's not been it's not been an easy path. Thank you.
Mr. Badawi, do you want? Thank you. Mr. Badawi, do you want to comment on the questions? I thought I asked about the electric bike parking, but I mean, nonetheless. In answer to Councillor Humphreys, sorry, I don't mean I mean Mr. Tidley.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I would probably address it through the Section 106 obligation for a residential travel plan and the condition for an operational travel plan for the non-residential uses, which already actually says, and I'm just looking at it, the travel plan should contain an action plan containing a package of measures to support sustainable travel modes to the site. Measures shall include consideration of bus services, local improvements to cycle and walking facilities, and provision for cycle hire and other micro-mobility schemes. So I think it's there, yeah.
Sorry, condition 24 could be adapted to include further information. That's to do with delivery and service plan, and that covers waste. That could be adapted to include noise mitigation and hours of movement.
I'm sure everyone must have made up their mind by now. I mean,
just one sorry, Chairman, matter of detail, which is about the landscape maintenance and how long is the site owner's obligation for, whether it is in perpetuity, or will there be at some point a bond? Because I'm concerned about trampled planting.
Condition 43 is for landscape replacement in the event of anything in future?
For landscaping, it's 5 years. For biodiversity net gain items, it's 30 years.
Funny, on Monday after we'd seen the site, I went off and walked through Swandon Way. Guess who was with me? Hello, Councillor Govindia. The two of us walked through, and the landscaping he pointed out to me was trodden over right, left, and centre, and not. Under whose chair who chaired that? Was that you, Councillor Govindia, or Councillor Humphreys? I can't remember, and I'm only making a jokey point. Don't rise too much to it. It's not that important. But it's very notable that just on the landscaping, that at pavement level, people just walk across grass. Just put it up a brick or two, and it makes a world of difference. I mean, just to make that comment on the side. Now we reached a conclusion. The officer's recommendation is we approve this application. Are we agreed? So we're taking a vote.
Sorry, Councillor Coles wants to make a point.
Do you want to make an amendment or something?
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to, because we covered on a few things that could have been covered as conditions or sort of informatives, like the short stay and sort of also the feel of the community, the feel of the committee and the ward councillors about wanting to see the transport investments. And I know that's going to be more of a point for the SIL and the administration, but I thought it was also, I'm just checking that these are all minuted and these will be sort of considered with the feedback with the committee report.
I'm sorry, I thought the ones you mentioned that was covered at the time, and someone said it was in a conditional informative. But let's be precise about it. Which ones do you think? Because I thought the ones you mentioned had been covered at the time.
They've been covered in a condition, for instance, the short stay cycling, but it was more that when the cycling, it was more just sort of almost an informative, given that when they do give their cycling plan, like there is some consideration for the short stay cycling, and then similarly as well the points that have been made by ward councillors about the transport infrastructure.
About the transport structure?
Yeah, as in like Wandsworth Town Station. But I mean, I know that's more of a SIL comment, and that would be more after the development, and it's not as related. But I feel like it's still worth noting that it's been raised. Well,
I'm sure it's been noted. You've been taking extensive minutes, but are we going to? You think it's all covered in the paper, or do you think amendments are required?
I think it's all covered. I think we'll just be minuting the issue with the transport, because that's a longer term aspiration that Mr. Tidley and his colleagues will be picking up.
Okay. So those in favour of the officer's recommendation to approve, and those against, that application is approved.